Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 114.
Very excited for this one. We are getting up there in numbers too.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
We're exciting.
114 months.
That's 114 amazing conversations.
Oh, it is. But when we look at the actual maths, that's 9.5 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's yeah.
Back in my day,
exactly. A little preview. Chris is old.
Yeah, I'm old. Yeah, that's the theme. I'm old. I am old, and everything I do is old. And we're going to bring on someone who's not old. So, this with the invent of how many apps there are out there to connect people. So we have social media apps. We have apps to buy and sell things. We have apps to date. We have apps to just meet people for coffee and a donut or a bagel. We have apps for everything under the sun. We thought it would be interesting to have a guest on that can talk about how we can keep the idea of remaining private, these privacy matters in our minds while we're interacting with all of these different applications and meeting people in the digital realm. So Kat was nice enough to get her good friend, Whitney Merrill, who happens to be a privacy attorney, and she also runs the Crypto and Privacy Village at DEF CON. So let's get her on the show now. We are back on the show with our guest, Whitney Merrill. Whitney, nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we were talking a little bit about you before you came on, and with your work as a privacy attorney. Of course, we're very interested in that. Our industry is very interested in privacy, but also your village that you founded and run at DEF CON, the Crypto Privacy Village. Maybe just to start off, can you just tell us a little bit about that village and what it is and what you focus on and why you even started it?
Yeah, I started the Crypto and Privacy Village back in 2014 when I was studying for the bar exam. Two of my friends had reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to, maybe create a space at DEF CON that focuses on privacy and cryptography issues? We think that, there's opportunity there. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And I really don't want to study for the bar exam. So I need something else to keep my mind off studying for the bar exam.
Win-win.
It was a win-win. We posted on the DEF CON forums that we were going to do it, and Jeff Moss was like, great, we think this is awesome. You should come do this. We'll give you a space. And so I basically set that up. So I worked with two other folks. We put out a call for volunteers, basically decided to have some speakers, and people showed up. That was kind of the most surprising thing to me, is that no one knew who we are, and volunteers came and were dedicated. And we have had volunteers since the very first Crypto Village in 2014 that's do it every year.
That's awesome.
And so we primarily focus on talks in all different areas of privacy and cryptography, from the most technical to the broadest applications and concepts around those two topics. We have a speaking track at DEF CON each year, and then we also usually have a workshop or like hangout space where people can work on cryptography-based puzzles, CTF challenges, etc., create birds of a feather sessions to talk about things they're particularly interested in. In the past, we've had key signing parties, etc. And this year, we're going to actually be at B-Sides SF right before RSA for the first time. So it will be our first conference outside of DEF CON. So taking on some additional work because, not busy enough. So why not?
Yeah. I hear you have just so much free time.
Yeah, so much free time.
Yeah. You were thinking, what can I do with these extra 20 hours a day? I'm doing nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of like that time you were studying for the bar exam and started an entire village.
Yeah, because you had nothing to do then either. I hear the bar exam is quite easy to pass.
The funny thing about villages, at least then, and maybe now, the expectations are much different on those starting villages nowadays, like last year and this year. But when we started it, we were just a room with a bunch of volunteers with, no real signage, no really any materials. We kind of took donations and it kind of grew organically. And so each year it just got bigger and bigger and more people wanted to participate. And so it's kind of grown beyond what I ever expected it would ever be.
And when you talk about your workshops, what is a typical workshop in a privacy/crypto village?
So we've done a bunch of different types of workshops. Some of our popular ones have been like how to set up a Tor exit node, or some practical applications for if you're privacy and security tips for those who are engaging in protest or activism, because especially nowadays that seems to be, more and more people are getting more involved in protests and activist issues. So we'll provide both of those. We've had workshops on, and I'm thinking back because we didn't do workshops last year, but we did the year before that, on crypto challenges that have been released, so that kind of teach you skills in various applications of cryptography. And so they'd walk through some of those challenges and how to solve those, as a way to kind of teach practical applications of crypto.
Okay, so that's really fascinating, and it kind of gives me a whole bunch of thoughts on what I want to talk to you about and ask you about from an SE angle. And I'm going to do a disclaimer for you ahead of time. So anyone listening, disclaimer, anything that Whitney says should not be misconstrued as legal advice if you are looking to be a professional social engineer.
Correct.
And that disclaimer end.
She is not your attorney.
Yes. Unless you call Whitney and pay her lots and lots of money, and then she becomes your attorney, now you can take all the advice she gives you. Okay. And disclaimer 2. When we talk about privacy in our industry, of course, for us, Kat and I, being professional SEs, we thrive on the fact that the average person is verbally vomiting their life onto every social media application known to man, from their most private moments to their geolocation and everything in between. That, of course, makes us successful in our job. At the same time, it's sad. It's sad to see it, because as much success as we enjoy, it means that the more successful we are, the more successful the bad guys are. So coming at this not from a end user perspective, but from a social engineering perspective, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot by asking you this kind of stuff, but when we look at some of the laws that are made, so let's take a look at things like two-party consent laws.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're hired by a company to do phishing exercises, right? So we're going to actually call your people, and we're going to get details that technically are illegal to obtain.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to ask questions that technically break the law to do it, and we're going to record phone calls, which technically breaks the law for two-party consent state. What consideration should a person getting into this industry think about, do you think, when tackling these giant thoughts that need to occur, and not just go, this is going to be fun, I'm going to go hack people, and just jump in head first?
This is like a law school exam. It's throw a hypo out in the issue spot. One of the things, if I'd be curious, is how is the company handling their employee privacy, and where are those employees located? So in the United States, even though there's two-party consent laws, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in your workplace. And so it may be that this type of exercise might fall under your capacity as an employee. And so collection and recording and data collection might already be disclosed to you. Some companies you'll see when you log into your computer or when you sign a contract, they'll say you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in your device or in your workplace, which allows them to record you in your workplace, to record calls for feedback and audio, especially if you're a customer support representative. And so in the United States, even though there are these two-party consent, it may even be, and I'm not an employment lawyer, so I will make that also disclosure, that the lack of right to privacy in your workplace overrides that consent, or the two-party consent. That's thinking about this for the first time. That's kind of where I would say that could be true. In Europe, that's definitely not true. You do have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your workplace, and a lot of surveillance tech that you would have for security purposes, right, to monitor network endpoints in a company actually has to go through approval with, there are these groups called the Works Council. And so if if an employee decides to hire folks like you to phish or vish individuals, they may have to go through works council approval to actually do that engagement and get approval, and then notify employees that might happen to them, and that it might be something information that might be collected about them.
So really what we can boil it down to would be up to the professional to sit back and say, okay, I need to find out these details before I start.
Yeah, or when you're making an engagement with a company to understand what their disclosures and like privacy employment situation is. Like, are they disclosing this to their employees at any point? Do they need to disclose it? Where are they located? Because I think you have some due diligence to make sure that the company's doing their due diligence on their side. But from a lawsuit perspective, who's really doing the recording? You're probably an agent of the company, right? Because you've been hired to do this. So it's probably the company that might be violating the two-party consent, depending on the contract.
That's really good to hear in some ways, because I've definitely used the response of like, you need to check with your in-house counsel. Like, I can't answer that question for you. So I'm glad to hear that is the proper strategy to continue moving forward with.
Yeah, I definitely think the burden is on the company to tease through these issues when they hire social engineers. However, I think we all have an ethical duty and responsibility to make sure that the company is doing the right thing, because we can't all assume that Facebook is going to be.
And that's a really good point, right? Is because maybe the law will not be adverse to us in our work doesn't mean we're absolved of responsibility to ensure that we're not harming others in the act of doing our job.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's always a question that comes up from people, because, and I'm sure you've seen this too, we go back 5 years and there was maybe a very tiny handful of people who called themselves professional social engineers. And we jump forward a few years and it seems like there is a never-ending supply of them now, which is good. That's always a great thing, right? Competition, for me, always results in me knowing that there's a need, because people wouldn't be offering services if there wasn't a need for it. So that means that businesses, companies are becoming more aware of the need and actually realizing that they need these kind of things to occur in their companies. So seeing people compete in that means that is becoming more of a necessity, which is great. But I think too, a lot of times, and I know I was guilty of this, when you first start, you're like, I'm going to go get paid to break into a building, and you don't think about any of the repercussions legally,
right,
until you're at the place and like, oh, what happens if I'm about to get arrested? What do I do then? Kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, the uptick in the importance of social engineering in the security and even privacy space, in kind of teasing out the issues that might exist. I'm on a CFP board for another hacker conference, and the number of social engineering related submissions that I saw this year was so much higher than in previous years, which means more and more people are getting involved, more and more people are thinking about topics around social engineering and really elevating it to, I think, its right importance in evaluating security of companies.
I guess we all know one of my favorite things to do is OSINT. I use it in all forms of my life. And I think I'm very curious if you've seen any good examples of, do you have any overall advice for where people leak the most information through OSINT, or where they really need to be personally more responsible for their privacy? Are there any really big hot button issues in the privacy world where that's concerned?
That's a great question. I mean, aside from the obvious ones like Facebook, I think people, if you are really active in like a user forum or a series of message boards, or you leave a lot of Yelp reviews, I think you don't realize how much information you might be giving about where you travel and where you've been from like the location perspective. Because I always think location data about an individual is particularly scary. Or if you once had location data turned on related to your tweets and now you turned it off, but it still exists on older tweets or on Instagram. kind of what does that location data say about you? So I think about, kind of everything that we leave when we try to be engaged citizens, which can be a great thing. I think there's just a lot of data left there. I am not on it, but there's that app where everyone from a neighborhood all chats and complains about things. And I can only imagine that is a really, really, really rich place to lurk if you wanted to rob a particular
Yeah, I've really
neighborhood.
thought through how you would gain access to those neighborhood forums.
So, because so many of my friends, I forget what it's called, but so many of my friends are like, "Oh, are you on your neighborhood like version of the app or whatever?" And I'm like, part of me, I just don't want to know because it will scare me. But also now a whole community that I'm not particularly familiar with, because it's not like people know their neighbors anymore, know a lot of information.
Yeah, it's called Nextdoor. I just looked it up because I definitely
Nextdoor. Yeah, there we go.
The husband pitched using it, and I was like, "Ooh, I don't know."
That sounds so terribly scary.
So I guess Valentine's Day is coming up, so I'm also curious about this. I did meet my husband on Twitter. I mean, not Twitter, Tinder, the other T. Sorry, Twitter. And, we hit that place in our relationship at like 3 months or whatever. And we said, hey, should we delete the app? And I'm wondering, when you do that, what kind of information leaves the app when you leave versus, should I be concerned that my profile is still out there somewhere maybe?
So, yes, I think this day and age, everyone is on some sort of dating app if they are single at a period in their life or looking for somebody else in their life. And as we saw through Ashley Madison, breach, dating and relationship data is particularly sensitive, right? There's a really tragic story about the Ashley Madison breach that someone was so upset by this information being leaked that they committed suicide. I only highlight that to say of the value and importance that personal relationship data has on an individual. Whether that be innocent single dating, polyamorous relationship dating, or choosing to cheat on a spouse, all of it is sensitive and personal. And so I just think there has not been enough research, especially in the privacy arena, about all of this data that these companies are collecting on individuals who are just looking to find companionship. And there have been some reports recently about the extent to which the network of apps, basically they're all owned by Match and then by another parent company.
Really?
And there's a really great article out there, and I'm sure if you Google privacy, Tinder, OkCupid data, it will come up. But where it was discussing how all of these companies have sharing agreements with other companies. So you may sign up for OkCupid, but Match also owns Match.com and Tinder, so they can share amongst each other. And how are they using that data if you're on multiple versions of it, or how are they using that data to shape their algorithms? After the GDPR, went into effect, these companies obviously have European users had to comply with subject access rights. So basically under the GDPR, you can get access to all of the data a company has about you. And this one woman had asked for her data associated with her Tinder profile, even though she had shut it down a while ago, and they still had all of her chat history.
Wow.
From one perspective, I'm thinking, well, gross, because I thought I got rid of my profile and you still have it. But two, that's some really intimate chat data that somebody had to pull and send to you. And so it's probably being stored somewhere, that's being used to target ads or being sold in some capacity. That's what this other article kind of made it seem. So if that data is breached, a lot of people would be really, really, really harmed.
And that's multiple entry points that they all have access to it. That's crazy.
So something fascinating as you're talking is this is episode 114. This is 114th month of our podcast being alive. Way back in episode 3, we had the guy who created OkCupid on the podcast. And he is a literal Harvard math genius. The things that he was saying they can figure out about a person based on the details of their profile and the stuff that they like when it came to the data they collected through OkCupid was astoundingly scary. I mean, really scary. Just the way they could figure out what your favorite food would be, where you would most likely end up as a career, where you would end up retiring, and just things that they would know about you just by correlating data that you willingly put into their app.
I also can't help but think about the regional data that they're getting, because it's, the profiles typically are regional. It is rather alarming. And I guess, I don't know, I think in my head, when I was first pondering on this topic, I thought of it as these people are just an itinerant population. This is a snapshot of their lives. And, hopefully if they meet somebody, they're off the app or they come back or whatever, but it's just a snapshot. And so somehow, apparently naively, that felt less bad. I'm now very much reconsidering that thought process.
Yeah, I mean, people are focusing on Facebook, and don't get me wrong, I'm one of Facebook's most outspoken critics, or maybe not most. I'm sure there are people who hate Facebook more than me. But I don't think people are giving enough attention to the abuse of the data that we're giving to dating sites, because we do want to be honest, because if the goal is finding somebody who you match with, right, or who likes or is interested in the same things you are, there is a inherent value in being honest. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who pump themselves up or, change what kind of data they're going to share. But for the most part, people, there is a value in being honest if you're trying to find somebody you're looking to spend the rest of your life with, or just a night with, or whatever it may be. But we don't really know what happens. And the scrutiny there hasn't been as extreme as it has been against some of these other platforms, because people say, well, you're willingly giving your data to Facebook. Maybe you shouldn't do that. But when you go to date, you put up a profile, you give them a whole lot of information because you're like, well, I think it'd be interesting if they knew this is where I went to school and these are my interests and this is where I live because I want to meet someone in my area. And now I've shared more information than I have with Facebook in years because...
And it's easy to forget. It's really easy to forget that exists.
And you don't know, like you said, where they're selling it. You don't know how it's being used. So there's a grand possibility that if they have these contracts with other sites that are not dating sites. So, OkCupid or Tinder has a deal with Facebook, and, you put, like you said, totally honestly, you put your Facebook profile in your Tinder profile, and now you answered all these questions super honestly about your likes and dislikes and personality traits, and that gets sold over to Facebook, and all of a sudden you start getting super targeted ads and super targeted posts.
I encourage everyone to find this article, and it really was interesting because it was kind of breaking down the web of how large this one dating company is. Match basically owns almost all the dating apps you use. I might even own Grindr at this point. And so that's a pretty significant population that you're reaching if you own Match.com, OkCupid, Tinder, Grindr. You're hitting a whole bunch of, and I think there are a few others. Maybe they own Coffee Meets Bagel too. There are, so many out there. And so they're getting multiple pieces of information across the same user who might use multiple apps, but also hitting different segments of populations based on what, is popular in that age group. And so they're really hitting their whole swath to get as many people as possible. And then they apparently are owned by another parent company. This is what I'm remembering reading this article. I remember thinking, oh God, this is a nightmare. And, as someone who's been on dating apps in the past, it's just how do I claw that back?
Yeah.
Can you?
I think European citizens can kind of leverage their right to be forgotten. They can reach out to these companies and ask that their data be deleted under the GDPR's right to be forgotten. But I don't know if they're honoring that right for folks in other countries.
Do you have any advice? Because I feel like the answer is not don't use dating apps. People are going to do it. So are there any guidelines that we should be following to protect our privacy while trying to find love or whatever you're looking for?
It's a hard balance too, because there's a big security issue in dating, right? A personal safety security issue. One of the things in the dating apps that they say is don't take the conversation outside the app. And you're thinking, well, that's because they want to hoard more data about me. But I think it's also because you can do abuse reporting and you can that information will be within their contained space, and they can kind of manage that as well. And then you're not handing out a personal phone number, or you're not, giving away additional personal information that you may not be ready to give to somebody that you're chatting with. So I think it's like a balance where, be careful in the conversations that you're having in these apps, because I think the data you're providing, if you, be considerate that what you provide out there is probably going to be now public, because not only can the company get all that information, but somebody who is just scraping all that information by clicking through tons of profiles will all have that information. So be aware that it is not private. It feels private because it feels like a small contained space, but really it's a public venue that you are announcing this information to the world. But when you move into chatting with somebody, really think about how your types of conversations you're having, and be also cognizant of, that there's a Reddit subreddit that does, I think it's our Tinder, where people screenshot their funny conversations with other Tinder users. And so be cognizant that, that conversation could be public at any given time. And then be aware that, you're putting trust in another individual, which is true of any personal conversation when you're meeting somebody. But if you get to the point where you have a trust, or you've met the person in public in a space with other people, because we should all be taking care of our own personal safety. But also, if you take that to your phone, or you give them a phone number, consider giving them a secondary phone number that isn't your primary, a Google Voice, et cetera, before you establish that relationship, or something that allows you to block them if it gets aggressive or takes a turn that you're not comfortable with.
Okay, Kat, let's take a quick break from the show to talk about what's going on in the world of SE.
Yes, it is an exciting season of announcements for sure.
It is. We just had an amazing APSE class in Orlando. So if you weren't able to get to that one, we're really sorry, but don't be too sad, because you have a couple more opportunities.
Which you should definitely take.
You need to take, right? So, and I should have had this up, but I'm going to actually pull the dates up as we are speaking, because our first one is in the beautiful town of Bristol, UK. Now, if you don't know much about Bristol, it's a tiny little town in the UK. It has a very diverse culture there. It's a really easy town to navigate and a lot of people to interact with, which is wonderful for the APSE class. So we're running that 13 through 17 of May. And right now it's got plenty of space open. We're maybe close to half full. So if you want in on that before we do the price raise, which will be at the end of this month, you definitely want to jump on that before the prices go up. 13 through 17 of May in Bristol, UK. Shortly after that, in April, we're running our first OSINT class that's going to be outside of like DerbyCon or another conference. And that is in Denver, Colorado, which I hear, and I haven't been, is beautiful in April.
It's gorgeous. I mean, to be very honest, just in case this happens, you can, in fact, get like 3 feet of snow, but it'll be like 36 degrees while it's dumping on you, and more than likely it will be gorgeous. But you just don't know until June.
Horrible sales pitch. It will not snow in April, people.
It probably
Do
won't.
not worry about going. Okay, the class has now been canceled thanks to Kat's ridiculously horrible sales pitch.
No, it's so beautiful. It's warm snow.
Oh,
it's a
my
real
Lord.
thing.
And
This
quickly moving on to where we're
understand.
to where we're not losing business is our next Black Hat, our next APSE class, which is at Black Hat. And you can find that out at the blackhat.com site, and then you can just go to training and you can see it there, and we'll get the link up. The link is up on our site also for that, and that is in August of this year. Now, from last I checked, we were over 20% last I checked, if I'm thinking about this right. Yeah, we were over 20% filled already, and probably by the time this podcast comes out, we'll be even more filled. So you're going to want to jump on that. That class usually sells out in 3 or 4 weeks, and then I have a lot of people emailing me, asking me if I can get them in. And sadly, I don't control the amount of space that we have there at Black Hat, so you better get in. That's August 3 through 8 is the whole Black Hat time, and our class is for sale on their site there. So get in before that one sells out. Okay, some other really cool things. Before Kat tells you there's going to be 45 feet of snow and a plague of locusts in the summer out at Vegas.
Yeah, do you want my weather prediction for Vegas in August? Because I can just stick with that theme.
No. We're moving on to what you're probably all very excited about is we have already launched the SECTF signups. Signups are pouring in. So get those videos made, people, because if what I see on the Twitterverse actually comes true, this year will be the most signups we've ever had. People are chomping at the bit to get in on that.
It's truly insane to watch the constant SECTF chatter. It's very exciting.
It is. It is very exciting. And also CFP is launched for the human track in SE Village at DEF CON 27. So if you're interested in giving speeches, you'll notice on the page some things are new. We are trying to bring in more content and bringing in more concise content. So we have 25-minute speaking slots on that page you'll be signing up for. Really excited to see how this works out this year. So get your speech idea and get over to the CFP page and fill that out. And very shortly after you're listening to this podcast, the SECTF for kids and for teens will be open. So you'll be able to get your kids and teens signed up for that. Super exciting what happened last year, man. We had so many teens and so many kids come and compete, and everyone had an amazing time. So we are really just ramping up the experience for this year.
Yeah, it was really crazy. I cannot stress enough, if you are the parent of a kid or a teen, or if you are a teen who gets your parents' approval, absolutely register ahead of time. Unfortunately, last year it was so popular, we literally had to turn 15 people away, and we still had over 20 teens compete. So I just cannot stress the importance of registering ahead of time to ensure your spot and your sweet t-shirt. So there's that.
Wow. Yeah. And we had to turn people away because we only came with a certain number of setup tools that we needed, the supplies. So if you don't sign up early, we may not be able to fit everyone. So definitely get in there. We'll be plugging this a lot more. And last but not least, before we end and get back to the show, is if you haven't seen, we've been working hard and had a producer come out to last DEF CON, and he has put together a 3-part series documentary on SE Village. And it is quite phenomenal. So that is out on the site now. You can find that on social-engineer.org. And we'll be posting some links on Twitter so you can follow Human Hacker and SE Village. And you'll be seeing that, plus with Kat and everyone else will be promoting that. So feel free to check that out. If you have any curiosity what happens in SE Village, if you're thinking about making the trek out there, take a watch of that documentary. And then we look forward to seeing you at one of our events coming up this year. I think that's about all we have. We should probably get back to the show. When you were starting off with your suggestion, I started thinking, the answer is so hard to give because I dated back in the age when we did it in actual flesh. Like you went up to a girl and you said, "Hey, I'd like to get to know you." And then you talked not through a phone or a computer because I'm old. So, we didn't have this new fandangle technology.
Super old.
I sound very old right now. Back in my day, I had to date uphill both ways. Okay. Now, the purpose of this, like you said it, Whitney, is that you may potentially be looking for someone that you're going to connect with for the rest of your life, right? So you're not going into this relationship thinking, okay, I'll give it a year, then I'll get divorced. You're going into this thinking, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this person. So it doesn't make sense to go onto an app and not be completely honest, right? If you're totally against drinking and you go on there and you don't answer that question and you get someone who loves alcohol, you're not compatible. The relationship's not going to work. Bam. Okay, done.
Well, is that true? Personally, I've had a situation that it works pretty well.
I was just using that as an example because it was PG.
I know.
It was PG. Okay. I don't think that should be taken as a blanket statement that those who drink cannot be compatible with those who don't drink. That is good. And you have proven that to be the case, where we have an alcoholic and someone who doesn't drink at all very happily married.
Wait a second.
Now, the advice is sound and it's good. And we say the same exact thing to everyone who asks us as a client, how do we use social media intelligently? It's almost verbatim what you just said about critical thinking and going through thinking what you put out there and blah, blah, blah. And people just look at you like, okay, that was a great little fantasy speech, but I'll never do it. But I love the idea So we use an app called Burner app on our phones, and it's on both, Android and iPhone. And it allows you for pennies on the dollar to just make up a quick phone number that will ring and text to your present phone. So I love the concept of, okay, now you're going to take this interaction out of this application and you're going to move it to real time and creating a burner number specifically for that interest, whether it's Craigslist, whether it's dating, whether it's selling something on eBay. And that way, if this person turns out to be a complete stalker, you can just disconnect that number and they're done. They can't find you. If I had done that with Kat, I would have never hired her.
What a mistake that would have been, but that's not the takeaway.
But she stalked me for months and months and OSINTed me and scarily knew things about me that I didn't think anyone knew.
I remember that.
It's a true story. I'm not even making this up. I mean,
No, she knows. She literally was.
No, I know. I remember.
She actually bought her way into the village with alcohol that she knew I would like because of OSINT.
Well, Whitney was at the wedding where we had that bourbon, so she's very well aware of this entire plan.
Whitney, I need help with the privacy lawyer against somebody now. Can you? No, just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, that would be hard to unwind from because I can get in touch with you by like 8 different channels at this point.
Yeah. Now it's impossible. Now you're so integrated that there's just no way. But I love the concept, and all joking aside, I wouldn't do that with Kat, but I love the concept of saying that when you're going to take that relationship out of the digital realm to the physical realm, at least taking some precautions to keep yourself safe so you're not opening yourself up for potential more damage when it comes to bringing it into the physical realm. That is such a wonderful piece of advice.
Yeah. And I find that, people are if you're going to find the person who you want to spend the rest of your life with, or who's going to be, your partnership, they're not going to judge you if you were like, oh, I gave you this number. Like if it goes to the next step, right? That this was temporary. I did it for my own personal safety, but hey, we've gone on like a handful of dates and here's my real phone number. Right. That person is likely, if they are the right person for you, is going to understand.
Right.
Also a huge category of people who go on these apps just to hook up. And that's also totally great and acceptable. But if you're, going with that mindset, you're getting to know them less. And so as you think through your safety concerns as well, and maybe you don't want them to contact you after the fact that you meet them, and that's your choice too. It gives you kind of that freedom to, on your end, choose the level of participation in the relationship, which I think everyone should. And I am not a relationship expert, but I think everyone should have the right to choose their participation in a relationship.
And we can say it could even be applied to selling something on Craigslist or selling something on eBay. And, you now have to exchange a number or a personal email with this person to continue that transaction or that relationship. And you are giving somebody, if you give them your real phone number or your real email address, you're giving them now a piece of data that definitely locates you outside the ether. It definitely locates you in real time. So thinking through that little critical thinking piece of how do I stay protected moving this from digital to real, I think that's a really great piece of advice that we haven't touched on yet in that realm, but really helping people to kind of think through that. Maybe even the sense, not that we're telling people to just create like tons of emails, but like I know I personally have an email address that I use for signing up for buy a movie ticket, or if I'm going to want a coupon for something. I use this email address because it's not linked to anything. It's not identifiable, and it's just a throwaway email. Now, I keep it. I use it. There's like 2,000 spam emails in there, but that's what I use it for. Even having an email that you just manage that could just be it's not linked to you as a person. And now you have this burner phone, a burner email, and you're at least somewhat more secure when it comes down to people trying to locate you in real time.
Yeah, 33 mail is a great one for that. I use it all the time. Quite frankly, I use it with like correspondence with my stepdaughter's school because I don't trust them. They do not believe in blind carbon copies. So I'm like, you are not getting my real email address.
For some people, though, it can feel really, really burdensome, right? That taking all these measures to protect your privacy. I'm sure you guys say this all the time, but it's picking the thing that you think is most valuable and the highest risk to you, and then at least protecting that. And so maybe I don't care if Pottery Barn has my email. Like, this point, it's out there. But I do care if a particular individual has my email that I regularly correspond with. And so figuring out how you make those risk judgments and then choosing the ones that are important, because otherwise you'll feel so overwhelmed where you're trying to protect it everywhere that you just won't. You'll get fatigue.
Yeah, I remember one time we had a podcast with Michael Basil, and I love that guy. And his brain works in a way that it just doesn't, I don't comprehend it. And he was talking about at one point, he was so paranoid to use his real credit card anywhere online that he had a trust company set up in Mexico that he used to buy burner credit cards that were one-time use so he can buy things from Amazon.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, dear God, dude, so I want to buy a pack of gum and I need to order a burner credit card from my trust fund in Mexico? I'm like, no. You know what? You can have my credit card number.
Kind of defeats the purpose of Prime Now.
Yes. Yeah, Prime Now in 14 days. It's like, but if I needed that level of privacy, that's a great suggestion. But I agree with what you're saying, Whitney, is that we can give suggestions that can make someone completely invisible, but it's also ridiculous when you think about the level that would be needed to make that work. I definitely would never suggest, hey, create an email for every interaction with a person so you can just burn it. I don't know about you, but I would need hundreds of emails in a month to manage that because of the amount of times we're interacting with new people. I agree.
I think Whitney's point about the risk is kind of at the crux of it, is what is your personal risk tolerance, so to speak. And I also think it's important, especially in dating, to recognize that risk tolerance can change over time and it can change situationally. Like if you're on an app to hook up, you are probably going to disclose something about where you live potentially or where they live. But then, over time, if there's a bad experience with that may change. For me, not where my purpose with the app is concerned, but when I was dating, it absolutely changed over the course of my relationship with those apps because I had a couple of extremely scary experiences. So I went from, potentially being too open with people to, well, I'm not meeting you anywhere where I can't bring my giant dog. I'm OSINTing literally everything I can about you. So any information you give me is now going to be used to connect, which this probably surprises no one. It's going to be used for me to see a little bit more transparently who you are. And yeah, by the time I met my now husband, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable giving you this right now. I'm bringing this giant dog on our first date. It's going to be during daylight hours at a public place. And so my risk tolerance absolutely changed. And I don't know if it hadn't worked out with husband Chris, how I would have reapproached those apps if I chose to use them again in the future, because it was just a couple dates before him that I went really scary. And so I think it's just important for everybody to recognize what their personal safety and their personal risk tolerance is, and letting people know where you're going and having some sort of guards in place is probably as best as you can hope.
Yeah, and you touch upon something that I also think is worth mentioning, since it's particularly applicable to this podcast, which is, OSINT by some other people might be called Google stalking and has this negative connotation where, oh, did you look him up ahead of time? Like you might be doing something that is taboo or not good. And I think I challenge people to turn the tables and say, no, I'm doing my due diligence to protect myself, to figure out the person who I'm meeting in person or dating is who they say they are, because it is so easy, because there have been so many bad stories and because it is so easy to impersonate on these dating apps, right? People can create this fake profile about themselves. They can look like a real human, but you find out that person is actually somebody completely else, and they've stolen basically their persona from a real person who shared a lot about their life online. Figuring that out and using that to your advantage is really important. And I think not something that anyone should be ashamed of doing, especially when it comes to your personal safety.
Oh, I agree.
That also leads to a second interesting tension point, right? Which is, if you can't find anything about somebody online, does that make you nervous? And so this comes to the idea where you've seen this about job profiles and individuals, that if you have no LinkedIn, if you have no profile, if you have no presence online, it's now being seen as odd. And so what are the tensions there when you're dating? Because if you value privacy and you've done a lot of work to keep that off the internet, and that's your choice, when somebody then goes try to find out who you are, how do they find that and how do they feel comfortable? And
that's an interesting statement, because I have actually found that in hiring people, when they have no social media presence, it actually makes me wonder if they're going to be able to do our job.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I look at someone like that and I go, wait, you're not on Twitter? You're not on Facebook at all? You don't even have a LinkedIn profile? Like, if you haven't used them personally, how are you going to stalk people? I mean, OSINT people on them for money, and it actually makes me doubt their potential ability to do the job. I didn't think of it the way you said it until you said it, but it made me correlate that emotion when looking at potential employees. That we live in a weird age, don't we? I do not envy the young people having to grow up this day and age where these kind of pressures, these digital pressures, are upon them to conform to a certain type of communication style. It's a little scary.
Well, it's like the Gen Zers' obsession with Finstagram accounts and your Rinsta, your real Instagram account, where they're actually splitting up their personality and what they're showing to the world and segmenting groups to see certain parts of their life. And so you can already see, I know for sure millennials don't think about it that way. Maybe some do, but for the most they don't. But almost like Gen Zers, I mean, if you come up with a slang term for it, it must be like a real thing in their generation, because they feel like it's pervasive. Their mom wants to see their Instagram. So they're like, here, mom, here's my one Instagram, or dad. But really the one they have all their friends on, where they're doing something that their parents probably wouldn't approve of, or maybe would, but they just don't want to share that aspect of their lives because they're individuals too who have private lives.
That is super interesting from an artifacts perspective, because as those individuals age, like maybe some of them are super clever and their Finstas in no way connected to their Rinsta, or however I hope I'm using these terms right. Now I feel old.
No, you shouldn't feel old. I had no clue what you just said. What's happening? I'm confused. I'm old.
Yeah, but so at 13 or 14 or 17, those accounts are likely still connected. So they're potentially operating online under these fake Instagram accounts very freely in an assumed area of privacy that will not long-term be potentially all that private, which is honestly very analogous to the dating profile issue. They might be saying things now in their Finstas that will sink a future political career. And I definitely know of some people who sent some sleazy messages on dating apps that, if those ever got released and they tried to run for office, like those are artifacts that are online forever. It's really, really fascinating.
And they will be. I mean, that they will be released, right? I mean, we just looking at the current state of the world and how debates and arguments occur. When you hate someone, you're like, 19 years ago, you said this horrible sentence, and then it becomes let's burn stakes in his front yard and hang him out to dry, and not saying that does not deserve sometimes, but I'm saying that these things come up and you're like, did I even say that? How long ago was that? And you find out, man, yeah, this stuff never dies anymore. It's there forever.
Yeah, I think it'll just be fascinating because, like, even though Gen Z has so many advantages in the digital space by growing up with it, I think we're going to definitely see those vulnerabilities still develop.
Yeah,
interesting times. I really don't know what the future holds, or if things like the GDPR's right to be forgotten really. If you at least know that your account is being really deleted, that gives you a little bit of a better feeling, as opposed to, the quote unquote, which I hate, engineers use, soft delete. I'm like, no, it's not a delete. You're just putting a delete sticker on a set of data. It is not deleted. Let's not use that term. And I actually hope maybe even the FTC in the future, even if we don't do a right to be forgotten, but I think when you say that something is deleted, right, and someone clicks delete or delete account, and the company does not fully delete your account and the data associated with it, that's deceptive under the law. And I would love to see that be pursued more by the FTC.
Yeah, I feel like that is definitely where the law intersects with technology, in the sense that the definition of delete is pretty important. There should be a legal definition of delete that we can fall back on.
Fascinating, Whitney. Some thoughts that we haven't really covered yet on the podcast. So thank you for coming on and sharing them with us.
Of course, just in time for Valentine's Day, for everyone looking to find love this February.
And it's 14, like 14.
There we are.
Like 2:14. Anyway, I'm done.
There it is, Kat. The Finding Love with Whitney Merrill. That's the podcast title right there. That's it. I'm writing it down. Finding Love with Whitney Merrill. You're gonna have so many emails coming your way when we're done. Oh man.
I'll just say, they should go to Dr. Ruth or some of the, bigwigs. But
No. You're the new love doctor.
The love attorney.
I hope not.
You're the love attorney. There it is.
Oh no!
The love lawyer. There you are.
Oh, I like the alliteration. Well played. I'm so sorry, Whitney. I hope this does not become a thing.
Oh, it's already a thing. I'm already creating the Twitter account for her. The love lawyer. Just kidding. I wouldn't do that, maybe. So before we get sued, why don't you tell us a little bit about where people can follow you or find out more about Crypto Village coming up I assume you'll be back at DEF CON this summer?
Yep, we'll be back at DEF CON. So you can follow the Crypto Village on Twitter. It's at Crypto Village. We also have a website, cryptovillage.org. You can find out more if you're interested in volunteering or participating or submitting a talk. We're going to be opening our call for papers for DEF CON very soon. We are, again, interested in all aspects of privacy and data security, or privacy and cryptography. So it doesn't have to be the obvious example of privacy. One of my favorite talks from last year was the privacy issues around women seeking abortions. And so please submit. To find me personally, I'm always on Twitter, and lately I've been snarky against Facebook at WBM312, and you can follow me there.
Awesome. Thank you. So one of the things we do with all of our guests is because we have readers that love, or listeners that love to read. So it doesn't have to be about privacy or about anything we talked about. It could be about dating for all we know. Maybe that's your favorite book, but we're looking for a book recommendation, something that you think would be enjoyable to read.
So a book I've recently really enjoyed is a book called How to Make a Spaceship. It is by Julian Guthrie. And it is basically the story of the space race, the Gen X or Generation X prize, or the X prize, that's what it was. Sorry, I'm getting since we were talking about all the generations, the X prize that basically triggered the start of the new private space race, kind of, moving it out of NASA and into the hands of private companies to kind of reinvigorate the space race. It was a really fascinating, really interesting book, and really well written. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for that recommendation. I always find it fascinating to see what people read just for fun. Like we have so many different book recommendations from, kids' books to all these kinds of like life stories that are motivational or talk about something you can learn lessons. So thanks for that. It's an interesting one.
No problem.
I have not read it yet myself either.
I have not.
I recommend it.
Excellent.
Thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate having this great chat with you. And if not sooner, we'll see you out at DEF CON.
Thank you so much to you both for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Well, another awesome guest with a great show. Thanks for getting in touch with her, Kat, and getting her to come on the podcast.
Of course. She's always so knowledgeable. And I find every time I talk to her, I find some new connection to privacy and data security that I had literally never previously thought of. And it's always eye-opening. I'm like, oh, right. I should think about that.
Yeah, I love the concept of like using a burner number when you take something from a digital to physical world to, just at first. I think, and I agree with her. I think anyone who respects you at all would not look at that as as a lack of trust or anything. Just as you were smart, you played it smart.
Yeah, absolutely. He made a joke about dating books, but there's a really interesting book called Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari, the comedian. It's entertaining, but it goes through some online dating data analysis in a humorous way. So that's really interesting. Yeah, so if you're curious about, if you really want to stick with the February theme, like.
Well, we are finding love with Whitney Merrill. That's all I got to say.
Exactly.
If you want to follow Kat on Twitter,
it is Kat Murdoch. That's Kat with a C, CATMURD0CK.
You almost forgot how to spell your name, didn't you?
Shut up.
Oh, I was so hoping you actually misspelled your name. That's pretty awesome.
Well, when you change your last name, it can be really challenging to sometimes not default back.
5 years ago?
No, like one. I guess this is way too much information to put on a podcast, but my name change was not that long ago.
On what date did you...
Shut up.
And if you want to follow us corporate, it's SOC Engineer Inc. Our new Twitter account for all things related to SE Village is just that, SE Village. And my personal account is Human Hacker. You can find us at www.social-engineer.org or social-engineer.com. Thanks for tuning in this month. Please leave us some feedback if you like what you hear. We make changes. We really do make changes based on your feedback. So we appreciate it when you give us any kind of review. Thanks, and we'll see you again later.
Staring through the embers on the 1st of November, and remember you were born a chosen.